Hello friends, welcome back to my channel. In this video, I'm going to be demonstrating how to do the 2x2 tubular cast on for my Cambridge hat. So you are going to need your project needles, which want to be a 16-inch circular needle in the right size for your project. So that's 40 centimeters. And I have here got the 5.5mm or US 9. I'm using a chunky yarn in this video just so that you can see things hopefully a little bit more clearly. You are also going to want a needle that is 1mm bigger than that, and ideally a 32-inch circular, although I think what I've got here is a 24-inch and it just about works okay. This is a 6.5 or a US 10.5. You will need some scissors, a tapestry needle, because I'm going to demonstrate how we perfect the little gap you get in the cast on edge. You will be needing a stitch marker to mark the beginning of round, and you will either need a crochet hook or a kind of small poking device such as this. I think this is like a 2.75mm wooden DPN that I've got here. Just something, fling it across the room, something to release your initial provisional cast on stitches. You will of course also need your project yarn, which, as I mentioned, I'm using a chunky yarn for the sake of this tutorial, and you will want some waste yarn. And this is a nice superwash yarn, and it's ideal for this because it's really nice and smooth and non-sticky. That's very important here. It doesn't matter if it's the same weight as your project yarn, but you definitely don't want to use anything like a mohair or a rustic kind of yarn, because it's just going to make it much harder to unpick those provisional stitches. This cast on has 4 different steps. So let's start with step 1, which is our provisional cast on. So we're going to take our project yarn and our waste yarn, and we are going to tie a little temporary knot in the tail of both of those yarns to attach them to one another in such a way that we can then easily undo it. So I sort of fold the yarn back on itself, wrap it around, but then I only bring the loop through under the, not through the tail, just through the main working yarn of both. And that way, when I tug on this later, it will just undo really nice and easily. Now, there are many ways to do a provisional cast on, but I like to do, for this hat, the long tail cast on method. So it's going to look very much like a long tail cast on for any of you who are familiar with that. And if you're not, I'm going to walk you through it anyway. So you're going to take this tail and loop end and kind of try and keep those out of your way, and bring your larger needle underneath that knot and kind of hold it here. You need to make sure that your waste yarn is going over your thumb and your project yarn is going over your finger, and then you're sort of holding the two together under here. And to make the stitches, you are going to travel with your needle over the waste yarn until you are looking at the 2 strands of waste yarn coming down from your thumb. And then you're going to go under and through that loop. You're then going to travel over your project yarn, kind of scoop it up and pull it through that loop, and then tighten up the waste yarn, and that creates your first stitch on your needle. So I'm going to do that for you a few more times, nice and slowly. So over the waste yarn, looking at the 2 strands, under and through, over the project yarn and scoop it through, and then tighten up. And you want to make these nice and even. So you want to firmly but gently tighten them. Don't make them too tight or you're going to have more troubles later on. Over, under and through that loop, over and pull it through. So we are always traveling over the waste yarn first, coming up through the loop, over the project yarn and pulling it through. and you're just going to continue like that until you have the designated number of stitches for the size of hat that you are knitting. Once you have cast on the number of stitches that you need, you can go ahead and just trim off your waste yarn, just leaving a little bit of a tail. I guess that's about 4 inches long. And then you don't need your waste yarn anymore, so you can just move that to one side. At this end, there will be this tie here. Just make sure you're not counting this section here as a stitch. It can kind of masquerade as one if this happens to be sort of hanging over to the front of your needle. And once you undo this, which you're going to do in a couple of steps time, that will fall away, it won't be a stitch. So just to point that one out. Okay, so we are ready now to move on to step 2, which is actually to work 4 rows of stocking stitch using our project yarn and our larger needle. So we're going to begin with a knit row, then we're going to work a purl row, and then we're going to repeat those 2 rows once more until we've worked 4 total rows. When you get to the last stitch, you will just have this remaining on your left-hand needle, and you can just let that fall away. Next up, we are going to purl a row. Once you've completed a knit row and a purl row, you are going to repeat those 2 rows once more so that you have worked a total of 4 rows. Once you've worked your 4 rows of stocking stitch, turn your work so the wrong side is facing you and your temporary knot is to the right. What we're now going to do is unpick this bright pink waste yarn and place the provisional stitches that we cast on onto a needle. For this process, you're also going to want to use either your little pokey device or your crochet hook. So first step is to just gently undo that temporary knot. And then the way that this is structured, the waste yarn actually runs through the first stitch twice. So we can just start by pulling it out completely like this, and then when we pull this one, we're going to release 2 stitches at the same time. So you can either pop your needle in and then release, or you can release if you're feeling brave and just hold on to the stitches. Then you're just going to repeat that process. So you can go into the stitch and then unravel, or you can unravel, hold it like this, and then pop it onto your needle. I like to just pop my needle in and then release. And it slides out nice and easy. So you're just going to continue doing that until the last couple of stitches, and then I will show you what you do at the other end. Okay, so I'm now at the point where I have got 2 actual stitches left to pick up, and then my waste yarn is actually traveling through this edge stitch, which we are not picking up as a stitch. You can pick that up as a stitch, but we cast on one more stitch than we needed so that we don't have to. So then this is how you will end. You will have the waste yarn traveling through here like this, and you just go ahead and pull that out. So you have now picked up all your stitches. So all your stitches are on your larger, longer circular needle. Yours will ideally be a bit longer still than this. This is 24 inch and 32 is really optimal, although this does work. And what you're going to do now is turn the work to have the wrong side facing you, and then kind of fold your work in half, as it were. So you're kind of laying your stitches parallel, a little bit like you're orientating things ready to work magic loop. Then you're going to need your project needle. So the needle that is the correct size for your hat and is 16 inches or 40 centimeters long. You are going to be working all these stitches from these needles onto this needle, and you are going to be alternating between 2 stitches from the front needle and 2 stitches from the back needle to set up the 2x2 rib. So I'll show you how to do that now. So I'm going front needle first and knitting 2. Then setting up for purl by bringing my yarn forward and purling 2 from the back needle. And then I'm going to repeat that all the way to the other end until I get to the final stitch, which will be on the front needle, and I'm just going to knit that 1 stitch. And then we'll be ready to join in the round and crack on with knitting our hat. You've now worked all of those stitches in the 2x2 rib, except for the very last stitch, which is just 1 knit stitch on its own. And now what we're going to do is join to work in the round, and at the same time we are going to be eliminating our extra stitch that we have. And this kind of works in 2 ways. By not using that side edge stitch, these are the same depth, which is perfect. And also having that extra stitch means that we can get a really nice tight join on joining in the round. Whenever I'm doing anything where I'm going to be casting on and then joining in the round, I always use this following step where I cast on 1 extra stitch and then do this little trick, because I find it just makes that join a lot nicer. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my right needle and I'm going to put it through the first stitch on my left needle purlwise and slip that stitch over onto my right needle. I'm then going to use the tip of my left needle to scoop up the second, what is now the second stitch on my right hand needle, bring it over the first stitch and off. And this is the stitch that the working yarn is attached to. So now I can pull on my working yarn and just really snug that up. So that has eliminated a stitch and joined everything up nice and snug. This is now our new beginning of round. So our beginning of round for this hat is between 2 knit stitches. So I'm popping on a marker to mark my beginning of round, and I am now ready to start working in my rib. I'm going to work a few rows for you and then show you how this edge is looking after a few rows, because you can't really see the true beauty of this edge until you have done a few rows of your ribbing. Then I will come back and show you that, and we will just join this little gap up with our tail. I have now worked a few rounds of my hat, and you can see how beautiful that edge looks. It really is such a gorgeous finish. It just doesn't look hand knit to me. It just looks beautiful. So I think it's worth those steps. And the only thing left to do is to weave in our tail. And during that process, I will use the tail to just neaten up this little gap. So I'm going to pop the tail onto my tapestry needle. And bear in mind that you may be knitting this hat with the intention of wearing it with the brim folded up. So you want to make sure that however you do this, it looks nice from both sides. So you can either wear the brim turned up or not, as the mood strikes you. So what we're really trying to do here is kind of hide this area behind this knit column. So I am going to begin by going through here and into the kind of second stitch or second row of this column here, and just pulling that across. And then I'm going to go through the first row straight across, and then through the first row of this knit column and pull it across. And then I am just going to weave the remaining tail in. So I hope this video was helpful, and I hope you enjoy knitting and wearing your Cambridge hats. Thanks so much for watching. Bye.